In today's video, I will show you the process of knitting a baby jumper. I'm knitting this for my baby due in September, which is just so surreal to even say, and I'm so excited to share this cute project with you. If you'd like to download a chart for the cables and all the written instructions to knit a little jumper like this one as well, you will find that on my Patreon. I will leave a link in the description down below. Very often when I knit something for myself, I will use an existing garment that I like the fit of, and in this case, I wasn't actually sure how big should a baby jumper be anyway, so I'll be taking measurement from a little sweatshirt that says 0 to 3 months. I drew a little sketch of the garment and I'm taking all the measurements I need to be able to replicate it. I will then use my gauge, which I took from the swatch I knitted, to test the stitch, and I will convert all those measurements from centimeters to stitches and rows. From here I'm able to make a little knitting plan and also a chart so I can follow the cable stitch as well. This is how the chart looks like. Having a chart really makes life so much easier, so I encourage everyone to practice reading and creating charts. Also, just wanted to share a little embroidery test which I was planning to do on the front of the jumper. I just did some chain stitch using a lash tool, and I think this is a great technique to add details such as an initial, which I was planning to do, but it has to be the right project. In the end, I decided to give up on doing the name initial as I didn't feel it was matching the look of the cables and it was kind of taken away from their beauty. Still a cute idea, and I will definitely use it for another project. It is time to begin knitting. I will begin with a 1x1 rib. Here I'm doing a waist yarn cast on. If you're not sure how to cast on a rib, I will link a video that can help you in the description down below. Here I'm using one of my favorite accessories, the transfer carriage, to transfer stitches from ribbon bed to main bed. If you are knitting clothes a lot, definitely worth investing in one. I'll begin by transferring stitches to form ladders. These ladders will serve as borders for the cables, will reduce some of the tension that is produced when knitting the cables, and will also help me see a little bit better where I need to cross the stitches and help me just not make any mistakes. I will have 14 stitches in the center for the around stitch, then 8 stitches for the remaining cables with 2 in between. I will not go in detail in this video on how to knit the stitches used, as I already have tutorials for these techniques. I will of course link those videos below as well. Knitting such a small piece really allows us to go all out with the cables, and even though these cables are not that complicated, I think they look really beautiful and intricate when combined. I am now on row 82 and I have to knit 2 more rows before beginning to shape the neckline. The reason I stopped here is because I want to reform stitches by grabbing the purl bar from an adjacent stitch so I can stop the 4 ladders in the center from forming. Time to set my row counter to 0. This is something that I always do when I begin the neckline for any project. Since I will be decreasing some of these stitches in the next few rows, I will not do both of the cables for these 2 sections here. I will only do the one further from the center. Ready to put needles on hold. I'm doing that for all the stitches I need to cast off in the center, plus the remaining half, and I will begin decreasing stitches to shape one side first. Of course, I have to also set my carriage to hold. For my brother, I just need to move my holding cam lever from end to edge. To decrease these stitches, I will be using a 3-pronged tool. I like to use at least a 3-pronged tool so I can see the fashioning. Since my carriage is on hold, I'm making sure to pull the needles out and then push them back into upper working position and knit the first row. In total, I have to decrease 9 stitches and also to continue the cable repeat for the last section as per my chart. Before knitting the last 2 rows, I will grab the purl bar again to stop the ladders from forming. We'll knit the last 2 rows and I'm ready to cast off this side. We'll cast off using the chain stitch method, so I have to manually knit a loose row first, then I will use my latch tool to cast off. All that is left to do now is to cast off the stitches in the very center, which is a total of 18 stitches, and repeat all the decreases in the exact same way on the other side of the neckline. Just like the little sweater I took my measurements from, I wish to also add an opening with buttons, basically a little placket. I have knitted the back up to the point where I want the placket to begin. I will put the left half of my needles and carriage on hold. I brought my ribber bed up and I'm ready to form 4 new stitches by grabbing the purl bar from stitches on main bed like so. I'll be knitting half Milano for the edge so it is nice and straight and it doesn't roll. That means that I will knit all needles when going from right to left and main bed only when knitting from left to right. I knitted 41 rows so far. I will transfer the stitches from ribber bed to main bed. We'll knit 2 more rows and I will begin shaping the neckline. I'm first casting off 14 stitches, then we'll do the decreases. Moving on to the other half of the placket, I want it to be overlapped, which means I need to cast on some new stitches. I'll begin by picking up 4 new stitches. This is just what I thought would work best, but of course you can do this in a different way if you prefer. My carriage is on the left side now, and I will knit 2 rows. Just like I did on the other side, I will form 4 stitches on a ribbon bed and I will knit half Milano stitch. So that means I will knit all needles from left to right and main bed only from right to left. To form the buttonholes, I transferred 1 stitch on both beds like so. I left the needle out of work and knitted 1 row. Then I simply brought the needle on main bed back and work while I placed the float onto the needle on ribbon bed. I then repeated everything I did on the other side. I transferred all stitches from ribbon bed to main bed, knitted 2 rows, cast off the stitches, and this time I have to cast off 4 extra, so 18 in total, and I did all the decreases. Moving on to the sleeve, I knitted 13 rows of 1 by 1 rib, just like I did for the body. I used my transfer carriage to transfer stitches from ribbon bed to main bed, and then I increased 1 stitch every 6 rows to shape the sleeve. The comb felt a little bit too heavy here, so I just removed it and added 2 claw weights instead. Now that I have my front, back and sleeves, I will begin assembling the jumper. The first seam I will do is the shoulder seam. I very often leave my tails quite long so I can use them to do the seams, and this way I don't need to add extra loose bits afterwards, which will save me a little bit of time. Using a darning needle, I'm making sure to catch every single stitch right below the chain stitch cast off. The next step is to add the sleeves. What I found that works best when hand sewing the sleeves is to catch every single stitch from the sleeve and alternate between catching 1 bar and 2 bars from the stitches from the body. I'm going to move to the neck trim. There are quite a few ways to figure out how wide you need the rib to be for a neckline. I will show you a method I use with my linker that usually gives me a pretty successful outcome. I will write down how many stitches I cast off in the center, for the back and for the front, and I will attach the section where I shaped, so basically where I decreased the stitches, and the straight rows afterwards on the linker. All I have to do is count how many stitches that is, and I can add them all up and know the total number of stitches that my rib has to be. This is how my calculation looks like. Initially I had forgotten to add the 4 extra stitches for the placket, but with that I have a total of 100 stitches. If you will add a buttonhole on the rib as well, just like I did, make sure you don't forget to do that as well. All I did for mine was to transfer 1 stitch at the edge from ribbon bed to main bed and then simply place that needle back and work to create a little eyelet. When adding the trim, I will first attach the body to the linker, and when I do that I will make sure to count the stitches so that every single section will match just like I wrote down before. Last step, every single knitter's favorite one, is removing the waste yarn. And the neck trim is done. All that is left for me to do now are the underarm and side seams. I will again use my darning needle and do a mattress stitch. I always like to begin from the bottom up to ensure that the rib is nice and straight, and if there's any stitches that don't add up, I will sort that closer to the armpit, where it will not be as visible. Not such a fun and enjoyable part, sewing in all the ends. I will use my darning needle to do that. If I have multiple loose ends to tie in, I usually use one of them to go around the other one so that is not as bulky. My little jumper is all assembled. To make it nice and fluffy, I will give it a bit of a wash. I'm going to hand wash it with warm water and a little bit of detergent. There's no need to agitate the fabric too much, just leaving it for 10 minutes to soak will do the job. But of course, it will depend on the yarn that you are using and the effect you want to achieve. We'll squeeze the jumper to remove the water, and you can see that the water is quite dirty. I ended up rinsing it in 2 waters as the first water was still quite dirty. You can already see how fluffy it has become. To remove the excess water, I'm going to squeeze the jumper using a dry towel. And now I can just place it to dry flat on a drying rack, but of course you can just place it onto a dry towel as well. And now all I have to do is to wait for my baby to be here so he can model it for us. Make sure to follow me on Instagram. I will make sure to share there when the time comes. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, found it useful, and maybe even learn a couple of things. Don't forget that you will find the chart and all the instructions to knit one yourself on my Patreon. Bye bye!